Goodnight, Mr. Tom, by Michelle Magorian, abridged by Maria Vigar.
Yes?
Said Tom bluntly.
What do you want?
A harassed middle-aged woman in a green coat and felt hat stood on his step. "I'm the billeting officer for this area," she began.
Oh, yes? And what's that got to do with me?
"Well, Mr. Oakley, Thomas Oakley. Ah, Mr. Oakley, with the declaration of war imminent—"
I knows all that. Get to the point.
He noticed a small boy at her side. "It's him I've come about," she said. "His mother wants him to be with someone who's religious or near a church. She was quite adamant." The boy was thin and sickly-looking, with limp, sandy hair and dull grey eyes. "His name's Willie," said the woman. Willie, who had been looking at the ground, looked up. Round his neck, hanging from a piece of string, was a cardboard label. It read, William Beech. Tom was well into his 60s, a healthy, robust, stockily built man with a head of thick white hair. In Willie's eyes, he was a towering giant with a voice like thunder. He glared at Willie.
You best come in.
The woman gave a relieved smile. "Thank you so much." She backed quickly away and hurried down the path.
Come on in, repeated Tom harshly. I ain't got all day.
Nervously, Willie followed him into the dark hallway. He shivered.
You can put that old bag down, Tom said gruffly. You ain't going no place else. And give me your mackintosh. I'll put it on top of mine for now.
Willie did as he was told, and then followed Tom into the front room. It was a small, comfortable room with 2 windows. One looked out onto the graveyard, the other to a little garden at the side. A large black range stood solidly in an alcove in the back wall. Willie glanced at the armchair by the range and the objects that lay on top of the small wooden table beside it. A pipe, a book, and a baccy jar.
Pull that stool up by the fire. I'll give you something to eat.
Tom cooked 2 rashers of bacon and placed a slab of bread with the bacon on a plate. He put it on the table with a mug of hot tea. Willie watched silently, his bony elbows and knees jutting out beneath his thin grey jersey and shorts. He didn't feel hungry at all, but he remembered what his mum had said about doing as he was told. He tugged nervously at the tops of his woolen socks.
Are you hungry?
Asked Tom. Yes, mister, he whispered, and stared miserably at the plate.
What you got in your bag, then?
I dunno, mumbled Willie. Mum packed it. She said I weren't to look in. One of his socks slid halfway down his leg, revealing a large multicoloured bruise on his shin and a swollen red sore beside.
Well, that's a nasty old thing,
Tom said, pointing to it.
What give you that?
Willie paled and pulled the sock up.
Best drink that tea afore it gets cold, said Tom,
sensing that the subject needed to be changed.
I got to go out for a spell, then I'll be back to fix your room, see? Up there.
He pointed to the ceiling.
Here's an old scarf of mine, he muttered,
and threw a khaki object over Willie's knees. He noticed another bruise on the boy's thigh, but said nothing.
Have a wander round the graveyard. Don't be scared of the dead. Least they can't drop an old bomb on your head.
No, mister. Willie heard him slam the front door and listened to the sound of his footsteps gradually fading. I must be good, he whispered urgently, and he rubbed a sore spot on his arm. He was such a bad boy, he knew that. Mum said she was kinder to him than most mothers. She only gave him soft beatings. Mum said war was a punishment from God for people's sins, so he'd better watch out. She didn't tell him what to watch out for, though. It could be in this room, he thought, or in the garden. He knelt on one of the chairs at the front window and peered out. A bird chirruped. He'd go outside. Between him and the graveyard lay a small, flat garden. Willie stepped forward to the edge where the garden ended and the graveyard began. He plunged his hands deep into his pockets and stood still for a moment. His attention was drawn to the large oak tree in the centre of the graveyard. It seemed a sheltered, secluded sort of place. He'd go and sit beneath its branches. As he walked towards it, he tripped over a hard object. It was a tiny gravestone hidden by a clump of grass. He knelt down and pushed the grass to one side to look at it. He became quite absorbed, until a loud, sharp barking suddenly disturbed the silence. Willie sprang to his feet. A small black and white collie ran round the tree. He stopped in front of him and jumped up into the air. He heard his mother's voice saying inside him, "Them poisonous dogs! One bite from them mats and you're dead. They got horrible diseases in 'em." Willie was petrified. He picked a thick branch from the ground. "You go away," he said feebly. The dog sprang into the air and barked and yapped at him. Willie let out a shriek and drew back. The dog came nearer. "I'll kill you!"
"I wouldn't do that," said a deep voice behind him.
He turned and saw Tom.
"He ain't going to do you no harm, so I should just drop that if I was you."
Willie froze, with the branch still held high in his hand. Sweat broke from under his armpits and across his face. Tom came towards him, took the branch firmly from his hand and lifted it up. Willie automatically flung his arm across his face and gave a cry, but the blow he expected never came. Tom had merely thrown the branch to the other end of the graveyard, and the dog had gone scampering after it.
"You can take your arm down now, boy. I think you and I had better go inside and sort a few things out. Come on."
And he stepped aside for Willie to go in front of him. Willie sat down on the stool, feeling numb. Tom walked across to the fire. "About Sammy," he said, and reached for the poker. Willie didn't hear any more. He couldn't take his eyes off the poker. He saw Tom's hand lift it out of the fire. The tip was red, almost white in places. The room seemed to swim. The poker came closer to him, and then the floor came towards him, and it went dark. He felt two large hands grip him from behind and put his head in between his knees until the carpet came into focus and he heard himself gasping.
"Breathe in deep,"
he heard Tom say as he held him out of the window.
"Take in a good sniff."
"I'll be sick," he mumbled.
"Go on, I'm holding you. Take in a good sniff. Let your throat open."
A wave of nausea swept through him, and he vomited again and again until there was no more left inside him. Tom wiped his mouth and face with his scarf, lifted him back inside, and placed him in the armchair. Then Tom tucked a blanket round him, drew up a chair by the fire, and watched Willie fall asleep. The tales he'd heard about evacuees didn't seem to fit Willie. He was quite unprepared for this timid, sickly little specimen. He looked at the poker, leaning against the range.
Oh, he never thought. No, surely not.
He picked up his pipe and baccy jar from the little table.
"I don't know nothing about children, but I know enough not to beat 'em and make 'em that scared."
He rose and went into the hallway. Sammy was scratching at the front door. Tom opened it, and he came bounding in, panting and yelping.
"Now you just shut that old mouth," he whispered firmly. "There's someone asleep."
By the time Willie woke up, Tom had sorted out the attic as a bedroom for him, and he was sitting drinking some tea.
"You feel better?"
he asked.
"You's looking better."
He poured him out a mug of hot, sweet tea and handed it to him. Willie looked apprehensively at his feet, which were being sniffed by Sammy.
"He won't harm you," said Tom. "You want to learn something what'll make him happy?"
Willie nodded, and Tom showed him how to hold out his hand palm up and tickle Sammy's chest.
"That's the idea. You just keep doing that," said Tom. "He likes you, see? He needs a good romp in the fields, he does."
And he looked at Willie. "And I reckon you do and all," he thought.
"You got gumboots?"
Willie shook his head.
"Best put your mackintosh on anyways."
The three of them trooped out into the hallway.
"That's your room, up there, sort of attic."
Willie stared at the ladder. "Mine?" Willie didn't understand. Did Mr. Oakley mean he was going to have a room to himself? Tom handed him his mackintosh, and they walked down the pathway and out of the gate, Sammy leading, Tom striding after him, and Willie running to keep up with them. At one point, Tom realized that Willie was several yards behind.
"Why didn't you tell me I was going too fast?" he said.
But Willie could not answer and only gasped incoherently. Tom slowed down then, and Willie walked more easily. He stared up at the gruff old man who was being so kind to him. "Mister," he panted, "Mister, can I carry your bag?" Tom mumbled something to himself and handed it to him. Willie hung onto it tightly with both hands. In all the speed of their walking, their romp in the fields felt very unreal for Willie, like a muddled dream. But there were things he noted and even asked about, like the straw roofs that Tom said was thatch, and the strange activity in the dairy, which filled a bucket with warm white liquid and made swollen udders decrease in size. "Ain't you never seen a cow?" Tom had asked him, astounded. And then there was the woman called Roe, who was putting black material up at the window, which, Tom explained, was to stop planes seeing where to bomb, which was a waste of time anyway, because who'd want to bomb Little Weirwold? The sky had suddenly become darker.
"Best be moving,"
said Tom, and they set off at a jaunty pace back up the lane towards the main road. As they neared the foot of the hill, the sky opened, and a heavy torrent fell mercilessly down. Tom buttoned his overcoat up to his neck and raised his collar. He looked down at the drenched figures of the boy and dog. Willie's plimsolls were now caked in heavy clods of wet earth. They ran into the hall, Tom's boots clattering on the tiles.
"Stay here while I put some newspapers down," Tom said.
Willie pulled off the weighted shoes and stood in the dark hallway, shivering helplessly. Presently Tom opened the door. He'd laid newspapers in front of the range, and Willie now stood there, steam rising from his jersey and shorts. Tom reappeared with Willie's brown paper bag. He placed it on the table and took out the contents. A small towel, a piece of soap, a toothbrush, an old Bible, and an envelope with "To whom it may concern" written on it. He looked under the towel for some nightclothes, but there were none. He opened the envelope. Willie turned to watch him. He knew the letter was from his mum. He checked again that his wet socks were pulled up, and stood very still. Goodnight, Mr. Tom was written by Michelle Magorian and abridged by Maria Vigar. The reader was David Brierley. Goodnight, Mr. Tom, by Michelle Magorian, abridged by Maria Vigar. Mr. Tom is used to living on his own, but at the beginning of World War II, like many country people, he finds he has to take in an evacuee. Willie has been treated badly in the past. His mother has sent a letter with a few things in a brown paper bag. "Dear Sir or Madam," read the letter, "I asked if Willie could go and stay with God-fearing people, so I hope he is. Like most boys, he's full of sin, but he's promised to be good. I can't visit him. I'm a widow and I haven't got the money. The war and that. I've put the belt in for when he's bad, and I've sewn him in for the winter. I usually keep him in when I wash his clothes, and I got them special for the cold weather, so he should be all right. Tell him his mum said he'd better be good. Mrs. Beech." Tom folded the letter and put it into his pocket. He found the belt at the bottom of the bag. It was a brown leather one with a steel buckle. Tom was angry.
"While you're in my house," he said in a choked voice, "you'll live by my rules. I ain't ever hit a child, and if I ever do, it'll be with the skin of me hand. You got that?"
Willie nodded.
"So we can forget that old belt."
And he lifted the bag from the table and went out of the room. Willie turned to face the fire, his head bowed over the range. His shoulders felt tense, and the top of the range hissed as a tear escaped from his eyes. He heard the door close behind him and hurriedly wiped his cheeks. Tom put a bundle on the armchair.
"Best get out of them wet things,"
he said, kneeling down beside him,
"so's I can dry them for tomorrow."
He peeled off his wet jersey and shorts and socks. Tom said nothing. There was no need. Willie's arms and legs were covered in bruises, wheals, and sores. Tom tugged gently at his vest. "It won't come off, mister," said Willie. And then Tom understood what his mother had written in the letter. His vest had been sewn to the waist of his undershorts.
"Soon settle that,"
said Tom, picking up a pair of scissors from the bookcase. Willie shrank backwards.
"I'll sew them back when you goes home. I promise, I promise."
Willie stepped forward and allowed him to snip away at the stitching. Tom dried Willie's thin, bruised body, wrapped him up in a towel, and sat him in the armchair. Taking an old flannel nightshirt from the bundle, he cut the body and sleeves in half, and Willie put it on. He handed him a thick pair of woolen socks, the heels of which almost reached the back of Willie's knees. Willie gave a small, tense smile.
"You can dry Sammy with that old towel,"
said Tom, indicating one lying on the armchair. Willie knelt down on the newspapers and began to dry him. Meanwhile, Tom prepared their meal: scrambled eggs, buttered boiled potatoes, and toast. Willie ate feverishly, and for the first time in his life he tasted cake, a piece of homemade ginger cake. He leaned back in his chair, resting his hands on his stomach. Tom suggested he look at a book from those on the shelf. "I got to read the Bible," said Willie miserably.
Tom gave a grunt. "I'll tell you a Bible story myself, in me own way. That do you?"
"Yeah, thanks, mister." Tom sat down in the armchair and lit his pipe. He leant back, puffing at it, wondering which one to tell.
"Noah's Ark," he exclaimed. "That's a good 'un."
And he began.
"Once, long ago..."
Willie leaned forward to listen, and Tom mumbled on in his own way, a little flattered at the rapt attention he was receiving. When he had finished, he found Willie gazing at him with adoration. Feeling a little embarrassed, he quickly cleared his throat and went upstairs to the attic to put up more blackouts. Eventually, all three were in the attic. It was a tiny room, shaped rather like a ridge tent. A small bed lay under one eave. Tom pointed to a china chamber pot on the floor.
"That's so you don't have to go outside if you wants to go to the toilet," he explained.
Willie crawled under the bed and curled up into a ball.
"What you doing? asked Tom. You gets into it, not under it.
What? Right inside? Exclaimed Willie. Tom drew back the sheets, and Willie climbed in between them. He stroked the blankets with his hands. The next minute, Sammy leapt onto the bed between Willie's arms and licked his face. Slowly, Willie put his arms around him and burst into tears. "Sorry, mister," he blurted out. "I ain't ungrateful, honest. I'm happy." Tom nodded, and Sammy licked one of the tears from his face.
"You warm enough?"
"Yeah," said Willie, and sank happily back into the soft white pillow.
"Don't forget them old prayers."
"No, mister."
"And you best call me Tom. Good night and God bless."
And with that, he and Sammy descended from view, closing the trapdoor behind. "Good night, Mr. Tom," Willie whispered. In the morning, Tom found Willie huddled under the bed. The sheets were drenched in urine, and there was vomit on the floor. Tom stripped the sheets off the mattress and carried Willie down to the living room. It was a hot, sultry day. Willie stood in front of the range. Tom pulled the voluminous nightshirt over his head and threw it into the copper with the sheets. He sluiced Willie's body tenderly with cold water and soap. The wheals stood out mauve against his protruding ribs and swollen stomach. "Sorry, mister," he kept repeating. "Sorry, Mr. Tom." Tom merely grunted. They had breakfast by the open window. When they finished eating, Willie sat dejectedly listening to Tom washing his mattress, the postcard for his mother lying on the table in front of him.
"How you getting on?"
asked Tom, leaning through the window. Willie jumped. Tom took the pencil from his hand.
"What do you want to say, then?"
Willie shrugged his shoulders.
"Are you happy here?"
"Yeah."
"Arrived safely? Is happy?"
"Mr. Tom," Willie interrupted, "you got to tell her I was bad?"
"No,"
he said, and continued writing,
"and is good. Yours sincerely, Mr. Thomas Oakley." There. Now, write your name.
Willie paled. "I can't." He couldn't read either. Tom scratched his head. The village children were reading by the time they were 6, and here was William Beech, born on the 7th of September, 1930, according to the label he'd worn yesterday, nearly 9 years old, who couldn't.
"You're 9 on Thursday," Tom said.
But that didn't register with Willie at all.
"Do you paint?"
asked Tom. Willie's face fell. He longed to paint. "No, 'cause I can't read."
"The ones that can read and write gets to paint, that it?"
"Yeah, I done drawing with bits of chalk and crayon on my own."
"We best post your card. Mustn't worry your mum."
The first place they called at was the Littles' cottage. The wireless was blaring out light organ music through the kitchen window, so Tom had to yell,
"Dr. Little!"
He caught sight of a tall, thin woman, Mrs. Nancy Little, who was digging a large trench in the garden. A cigarette dangled in her mouth. Dr. Little was leaning back in a wicker chair.
"Hello, Tom," he said. "This is a surprise."
Mrs. Little introduced herself to Willie and took him round to the kitchen for a drink. Tom wanted some advice about Willie.
"Been sick twice already," he said.
"Malnutrition," the doctor remarked. He supposed that Willie was also bedwetting, and told Tom that the boy needed time to settle.
"There's something else," said Tom. "The boy's had a bit of a whipping, like, done with a belt buckle mostly. He's too ashamed to let folks see. If you could manage to have a look."
"Use this,"
croaked a refined voice from behind.
"and warm salty water."
It was Mrs. Little with a tray of drinks and a bottle of witch hazel.
"We exchanged battle scars," she explained. "I've given him a couple of garters for his socks. You'd think I'd given him the moon."
Tom picked up the witch hazel.
"It's on the house,"
said Nancy.
"Well, thank you for your advice, Doctor.
"I won't keep you from your work any longer," said Tom. Mrs. Little gave a loud laugh which deteriorated into a spasm of coughing. "I'm the one doing the work," she said. "When those bombs start falling, he'll be the first to dive into this." "I shall remain in bed," retorted the doctor. "I might as well die in comfort, don't you agree, Tom?" Until recently, Tom had pooh-poohed the whole idea of an air raid shelter, but now he replied, "There's the boy to think of." Presently they left the Littles and were approaching Mrs. Fletcher's cottage, one of those with thatched roofs that they'd passed yesterday. A small crowd were gathered there, listening to the wireless. Tom showed Willie the post office and said he'd meet him at the corner shop opposite. Then he headed back towards the group of listeners with Sammy. Willie opened the door to the post office and stepped in. He found himself in a room at the end of which was a small counter with a piece of netting above it. Standing next to the netted window was a young boy writing intently. A young man in his 20s with short cropped hair was sitting behind the netting talking to him. "They'll never read that," he said. "Yes, they will," the boy replied. He was holding a magnifying glass over a postcard and writing on it in the tiniest hand. "Mother's got one of these too," he said, waving the glass. Willie guessed the boy was about 9. His body was wiry and tanned, and he had a thick crop of black curly hair. All he wore was a baggy pair of red corduroy shorts, held up by braces, and a battered pair of sandals. His back and legs were completely bare. "Can I help you, son?" asked the postmaster. Willie blushed and slid his card across the counter. "Staying with Mr. Oakley, eh? You'll have to watch your P's and Q's there." Did everyone know that he couldn't read? He glanced at the strange boy again. The boy looked aside at him and smiled, taking in his crumpled grey shorts and jersey. Willie turned quickly away and walked out of the door, his ears smarting. "There you are," muttered Tom. "Coming in or not?" The corner shop appeared to sell everything from fruit and vegetables to crockery and bread. Mr. Miller, the owner, caught sight of Willie. "Here, what do you want?" he cried angrily. Willie blushed and backed away. "Boy's with me," Tom said. "Oh, sorry, Mr. Oakley," said Mr. Miller. "That's different. Some of these London kids can't be trusted." They were heading back along the road outside Mrs. Fletcher's cottage again when someone began shouting at them. "That's Charlie Ruddles," muttered Tom. "He thinks he's going to win the war." The old man in the ARP uniform came puffing up to them. "Where's your gas masks, then? You shall be in trouble if you don't carry one. Don't you know war's going to be declared any second?" All right," said Tom, still pursued by Charlie. "You shall wake up one of these mornings and find yourselves gassed to death," he yelled. "All right, I said I'll get one. Come on, William, don't dither. We's got to go into town." Goodnight, Mr. Tom was written by Michelle Magorian and abridged by Maria Vigard. The reader was David Briley. Goodnight, Mr. Tom, by Michelle Magorian, abridged by Maria Vigard. Mr. Tom is a gruff old countryman. Willie is an evacuee who's been billeted on him in September 1939. Willie's mother has provided little in the way of clothes, so Mr. Tom has decided to take him shopping.
"Now, we got a lot to do, boy," said Tom. "You reckon you can keep up?"
Willie nodded. They passed a bicycle shop and a cobbler's and turned a corner into the main street, stopping outside a newsagent's shop. A placard was leaning up against the wall. It read, "Poland invaded." The door of the shop was propped wide open.
"Hot, ain't it?"
said a tiny old lady from behind the counter.
"Your usual, is it, Mr. Oakley?"
Tom nodded. She reached up to a yellow tin of tobacco on one of the shelves. A pile of comics caught Willie's eye. Tom glanced at him.
"One sweet and one comic," he said sharply. "Choose."
Willie was stunned. He swallowed hard. He'd never been asked to choose anything, ever.
"A lolly, please, miss,"
he said at last.
"What flavour, dear?"
she asked him. He frowned and panicked for a moment.
"Strawberry."
The old lady opened a jar and handed one to him.
"Now, what comic would you like?"
Willie felt hopeless.
"I can't read, Mr. Tom."
"I know that, but I can."
The words leapt out of Tom's mouth before he had a chance to stop them. He felt a mixture of astonishment at himself and irritation that his rigid daily routine was going to be broken after 40 undisturbed years. Willie at last chose a comic with his sweet, and Tom paid for them. It was his first comic. His hands shook as he held it.
"Get moving, boy. Are you deaf?"
As they were crossing the square, Willie tugged at Tom's sleeve.
"Mr. Tom,"
he said urgently.
"Mr. Tom, I know this place. That's where I were yesterday."
"Come on, William," said Tom. "I got a list of things a mile long for the drapers."
"Good morning, Mr. Oakley,"
said the draper.
Tom grunted. A sound of light organ music came from the wireless at the end of the counter.
"For the latest news,"
explained the draper.
"I must say this waiting is getting on my nerves. That Chamberlain's so slow. We're ready for it. I says let's get on with it and stop this shilly-shallying."
"I've been hearing that blessed organ music all bloomin' day," said Tom grumpily. "Can't he play no other instrument?"
"That's Sandy Macpherson," said the draper. "Wonderful man, holding the BBC together in this national time of stress, Mr. Oakley."
"Sure he ain't causing it," retorted Tom.
He pushed a list across the counter.
"The boy's only got what he's standing up in," he said.
"A pleasure, Mr. Oakley,"
beamed the draper, and proceeded to bring out 2 rolls of grey and navy flannel, as indicated on the list, and several rolls of corduroy. Apart from the flannel, which was for school trousers, Tom asked Willie to choose 2 more colours from the corduroy. He eyed Tom's green trousers and pointed to the green, and then to the navy.
"Good,"
muttered Tom.
"The boy's beginning to think for himself." "I'll have these braces as well," said Tom,
and placed them on the counter. The items were wrapped in sheets of brown paper, and Tom said he would collect it all after he'd been to the bank.
"No hurry, Mr. Oakley,"
said the draper cheerfully.
"I'll be here all day."
Next door was a shoe shop.
"Boots,"
said Tom, indicating Willie's feet.
"We'll get some linseed oil to soften them up,"
Tom said, as Willie stood up in a solid pair of brown ankle boots. A huge lump seemed to burn in Willie's chest.
"Are they for me?"
he asked.
"Well, they ain't for me,"
answered Tom shortly.
"Come on."
A trickle of sweat rolled down the side of Tom's face. The heat was stifling even outside. Willie held his boots and tugged at Tom's trouser leg.
"What is it?"
he grunted. Willie was pointing to a tiny shop down the small road they had just crossed. In the front window was a display of paintbrushes, which were arranged in a fan. Tubes and coloured pots and boxes were scattered below. Tom's heart sank. He hadn't been in that shop since the day after his young wife Rachel had died. It was her favourite place. For 40 years he hadn't been able to bring himself to venture into it again. He remembered how she used to spin round with delight in there.
"I ain't got time," Tom said, abruptly turning away.
They walked up the lane and back onto the main street and stopped outside the library.
"Best join," said Tom, "if you'sn't going to stay."
They walked up to a large wooden table covered at each end with a pile of books. A tall, thin, angular woman in her 30s sat behind it. She looked up at them and allowed her glasses to fall from her nose. They dangled on a piece of string around her neck.
"I've come to join him up,"
said Tom, indicating Willie. Miss Amelia Thorne gazed at Willie and stared at Tom in astonishment. "But you're—" She was about to say, "a bad-tempered, frosty old—" but she stopped herself.
"I'm what?"
asked Tom. "You're so busy." Too busy, she thought. He never helped or joined in any of the village activities, and he had ignored all the signs that a war was approaching. She leant over the table and gasped. They were both carrying their gas masks. She blinked. Mr. Oakley, of all people, was carrying a gas mask.
"How many he's allowed to have?"
3.
"Let him choose 2 with pictures and 1 for me to read to him. I'll leave the boy here to choose his books. I've got shopping to do."
Within half an hour he was back again at the library. He peered through the glass at the top of the door. Willie and Miss Thorne were both absorbed in one of the books they were looking at. Tom hesitated for a moment and then walked hurriedly back towards the artist's shop.
40-odd years, he muttered,
and pushed the door ajar. It gave a loud tinkle.
"Even the same bell," he thought. "I'll have to shout this story," yelled Tom above the noise of the storm. "We were lucky to get back when we did."
Rain and hail bounced on the tiled roof. Willie sat on his bed in his crisp new pyjamas. "Can I have Noah's Ark again?" he said. Tom related the tale for the second time and followed it with the daring exploits of Pecos Bill from the comic Willie had chosen. When Tom finished, he blew out the lamp.
"Good night, William,"
he said, tousling Willie's hair.
"Pot's by the bed if you wants it."
Willie was exhausted. His head whistled with the names and faces of all the people he had met that day, and almost immediately he fell into a deep sleep.
"Morning,"
said Tom, appearing at the trapdoor.
"So you slept in the bed last night? Good."
"Morning," answered Willie. He gave a tight smile, which faded rapidly when he realized that the trousers of his new pyjamas were soaking. Tom strode across the room.
"Come and take a good sniff of this day,"
he said, pushing open the window. Willie clung onto the top of the blankets.
"Never mind about them sheets and jammers. I got a tub of hot water waiting for them downstairs."
Willie climbed out of bed and joined him.
"Reckon that storm's washed a few cobwebs away?"
They rested their elbows on the windowsill and stared silently out at the gentle panorama until their reveries were interrupted by loud barking from Sammy in the graveyard.
"Wants attention, he does," murmured Tom, drawing himself away from the window. "We've got another busy day, William. Got to start digging a trench for the Anderson this afternoon. That'll put muscles on you."
They stripped the bed between them and carried the sheets downstairs. The mattress was quite dry, because Tom had put a rubber sheet over it the night before. Tom gently washed Willie's body again and smoothed witch hazel onto the sore spots. Once Willie was dressed, Tom set off for church early because he had to see Mr. Peters the vicar before the service started. Willie staggered on after him. It was difficult for him to move in his new boots. Yet his bony legs, which usually felt as if they would collapse beneath him, felt firmer, stronger. He found the back door of the church already open, and Mr. Tom talking to a tall, lanky man with piebald black and grey hair. It was Mr. Peters. Suddenly it occurred to Willie that the church would soon be filled with people. He hated crowds and dreaded Sunday service, and its aftermath, which was usually a good whipping. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Tom.
"Stay with me, boy,"
he said, and Willie gratefully followed him into one of the pews. Within minutes the tiny church was flooded with men, women and children. Willie recognised quite a few faces. There was Mr. Miller from the corner shop, and the young man behind the mesh at the post office. A hacking cough from the porch heralded the arrival of Nancy Little and the doctor. Willie gasped. She was wearing trousers to church. He waited for the thunderous, "Thou shalt be cast into the eternal fires." But the vicar only smiled and shook her hand. Behind the Littles, Willie saw Miss Thorne, the librarian. Mr. Tom suddenly pointed out Mrs. Hartridge, who he said might be his teacher. She was sitting next to her uniformed husband. Willie gazed at her quite spellbound. She was so beautiful, he thought, so plump and fair.
"And them be the Barnes family,"
whispered Tom, as a group of men and women arrived.
"They own Hillbrook Farm. Biggest round here for miles."
Mr. Barnes was accompanied by his 3 sons, 2 daughters, his wife, and a couple of evacuee children, a boy and a girl.
"Trust old Barnes to pick a strong-looking pair," muttered Tom to himself.
When everyone was reasonably settled, Mr. Peters welcomed the congregation, especially, he said, those who were visitors in Little Weirwold, who he hoped would be safe and happy here. Then he announced hymn number 85, and Mr. Bush, the young headmaster of the village school, played the introductory chord on the organ. The hymn was followed by a reading and then prayers. Then the vicar looked at his watch and walked towards the wireless. All eyes were riveted on him. The wireless crackled for a few moments, and then the voice of Mr. Chamberlain became clear. "I am speaking to you," he said, "from the cabinet room at 10 Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note, stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany." A few people gave a cry. The rest remained frozen into silence. Mr. Peters turned the wireless off. After what seemed an interminable silence, he spoke. "Let us pray." Goodnight, Mr. Tom was written by Michelle Magorian and abridged by Maria Viga. The reader was David Brierley. Goodnight, Mr. Tom, by Michelle Magorian, abridged by Maria Viga. The Second World War has just been declared. Mr. Tom is putting an Anderson shelter in his garden. He gets Willie, the young evacuee who is staying with him, to try it out.
"William, like to have a try of this doorway?"
Willie wandered over towards the entrance and put his head cautiously through the hole, stepping gingerly inside. It was dark and smelt of damp earth. Tom joined him. The shelter curved well above his head, so they could both stand quite comfortably inside. They crawled back out into the sun, and Tom thanked Mr. Fletcher and his sons warmly for all their help. "Pleasure," said Mr. Fletcher. "We must all help one another now." "William," said Tom, after the Fletchers left, "I'm afraid we ain't quite finished yet. We just got to cover it with earth. Got any strength left?" Willie was exhausted, but he was determined to keep going. He nodded. Between them, they started to cover the shelter until Tom had to go to a meeting in the village hall. Willie, who was covered in muck from head to toe, just kept going. He was so absorbed in his task, he didn't notice dusk was approaching. As he worked, a shadow fell across his hands. He looked up, and there, half silhouetted in the twilight, stood the wiry, curly-haired boy he'd seen at the post office. "Hello," he said brightly. "You're William Beech, aren't you?" Willie nodded. "I'm Zacharias Wrench." "Oh," said Willie. "I'm called Zack for short," he grinned. "I say, can I help? I'd like to." Willie was taken aback at being asked. "Yeah," he said quietly, "if you wants to." "Thanks. Is this your first visit to the country?" But before Willie could reply, he was already chattering on. Suddenly he said, "I say, we'll be at school together, won't we?" Willie shrugged his shoulders. "I dunno." He felt somewhat bewildered by this stranger's friendliness. "I expect you think I'm a bit forward, but you see, my parents work in the theatre, and I'm so used to moving from town to town that I can't afford to waste time. As soon as I see someone I like, I talk to them." Willie almost dropped the clod of earth he was holding. No one had ever said they liked him. He'd always accepted that no one did. "I say, I can't reach the top of this," said Zack. "Is there a ladder indoors?" Willie nodded. "It's Mr. Tom's." "I'll take the blame if there's any trouble," said Zack. "Maybe we can finish it and put the ladder back before he returns." Meanwhile, Tom had arrived at the village hall. "Well, Mr. Oakley," burbled Mrs. Miller, "this is a surprise." Tom frowned, then cleared his throat. "Vicar called the meeting, so here I am." He made his way to the back of the hall, where he hoped he would be less conspicuous, but most of the villagers nudged one another and turned to stare in his direction. They weren't used to seeing Tom at meetings. Since Rachel's death, he hadn't joined in any of the social activities. In his grief, he had cut himself off from people, and when he recovered, he had lost the habit of socializing. And yet, here he was tonight, not only attending a meeting, but also volunteering for fire-watching duty. "Bet Rachel's having a good laugh," he thought to himself. Mr. Thatcher stood up to talk about fire-watching duties. "No one is allowed to do more than 48 hours a month. That's a couple of hours a day." Tom raised his arm. "Yes, Tom? Did you wish to say something?" "I'm volunteering, like," said Tom. "Early in the morning, like, or tea time. Can't leave the boy at night." There was a murmur of surprise and enthusiasm. It was decided that the first aid post would be at Dr. and Nancy Little's cottage. The village hall was to be the rest centre. To cope with the extra 70 children, Mrs. Black agreed to help at the school. When all the volunteers' names and details of their duties had been written down, the meeting was brought to a close. By the time Tom was back in the garden, it was quite dark. "William, where is you?" He could hear voices near the shelter. "Ain't you got sense enough to go indoors?" "It was my idea," said a cultured voice, "to keep at it." "Who's that?" "Me, Mr. Oakley. Zack. I persuaded Will to partake of my company for a while." Tom screwed up his eyes to look at Zack. "Best come in," he said at last. When they were sitting down with a cup of tea, Tom said, "You finished the shelter, then?" Willie nodded and glanced in Zack's direction. "He helped." "How did you reach the top?" asked Tom. "With the ladder. That was my idea," said Zack. "Oh, was it now? You put it back, then?" "Oh, yes. It might be a bit earth-stained, though." Tom relit his pipe, and they chatted on. Zack telling him that he was staying with the Littles, which suddenly reminded him that he had to get back for 9 o'clock. "Thanks for the tea, Mr. Oakley. May I come round tomorrow and see Will?"
Up to William. Ask him.
"Can I?" said Zack earnestly. "Yeah." "Wizard! See you tomorrow then, Will. Good night, Sam," he said, giving him a pat. Tom told Willie to see his friend out, and by the time he returned, he found Tom pouring hot water into a large copper tub.
Come on, then,
said Tom.
Best have a good soak.
"Is it for me clothes, Mr. Tom?"
It's for you.
Willie swallowed. "Please, mister, I can't swim. I'll drown."
And you never...
But he stopped himself. It was a stupid question.
You don't put your head under. You sit in it and washes yourself and has a little lean back, said Tom.
It took some time before Willie allowed himself to relax in the water. Tom handed him some soap and showed him how to use it. Then he washed his hair several times with such vigour that Willie thought his head would fall off. By the time he'd had his bath, drunk the cocoa and had his story from Tom, Willie was certainly ready for bed. He wanted to think about his meeting with Zack, but sleep overtook him almost at once. "I say, Will," Zack exclaimed the next morning, "what on earth have you done to your hair?" Willie looked blankly back at him and pushed his fingers through it. His scalp didn't itch any more. "What's wrong with it?" he said. "Nothing. It's just a different colour, that's all. I didn't realise you were so fair," said Zack. Willie was just considering this comment when the back gate opened. It was George, one of the younger Fletcher boys. "Mr. Oakley," he said, "me and the twins is going blackberrying and taking a picnic." He glanced at Willie. "Would William like to come with us? Mum says she's making enough for us all." "I say," said Zack, "can I come? I'd bring some food too." George stared at him in horror. These townies were queer folk, he thought. They talk different. It was bad enough having to ask the one called William to come. Drat his mum. "Please," said Zack earnestly. "All right," said George. What else could he say? He knew the twins would be furious with him. "Meet you outside the shop," he grunted, "in an hour's time." From the moment Zack and Willie joined the others outside the shop, it was obvious that the twins were sulking. George mumbled incoherently to them. Zack introduced Willie to the twins. Then there was a long, tense silence. George cleared his throat. "Well, suppose we best get started." They turned and headed down the lane towards Ivor's farm. Willie wished his tongue wasn't quite so dry and that the skin round his neck didn't feel so tight. As they got to Ivor's farm, the girls walked off in one direction to some hedges on the far side, leaving George with Willie and Zack. "Who's in the doghouse, then?" asked Zack. "You or us?" George gave a smile. "Come with me," he said. "I'll find you a good spot." He pointed to some bushes. "See them red berries," he said. "If you eat any of them, you'll die. Them's poisonous. Don't eat nothing till you've shown me. Look, there's a good 'un." He pointed to a hedgerow dripping with blackberries. "You pick there." An hour later, after scratching their arms and legs and staining their hands and mouths with juice, they sat down in the grass to have their picnic. The girls looked less sulky now, and soon became quite chatty. Willie learned that Carrie liked reading books and climbing trees, and Ginny liked pressing wild flowers, knitting and sewing. George liked fishing and swimming and playing cricket. Zack said he liked acting and reading adventure books and poetry. Willie didn't say anything at all. Then suddenly Zack turned to him. "Will, what do you like?" Willie began to panic. He didn't know what to say. He swallowed hard and then remembered something. "I like drawing," he said. George said he was hopeless at drawing and Carrie made a joke about that, and they all laughed. They decided to go home because their baskets were full and they were tired. Willie had a job to carry his basket and keep up with the others, but he knew the day had been well worth the effort. That evening he and Tom washed and bottled the blackberries and ate some of them for supper. He sank into an even deeper sleep that night, knowing that he, Willie Beech, had survived a whole day with 4 other people of his own age, and he had made jam. It was a dull morning. "Eat up, boy. Soon be time to go to school," said Tom. "Best take your cap and mackintosh. Looks like rain." They walked together as far as the lane, where they could see Zack sitting on the Littles' dilapidated gate. He was waiting for Willie. Tom stood watching after them as they slowly disappeared round the corner. The school was buzzing with children. "It ain't usually like this," said Carrie. "We have to share the school with some Catholics," George said, pointing to the 2 nuns who were surrounded by a horde of children. "If it stays like this," he said, "we ain't going to have much school at all," and grinned with pleasure. Mrs. Hartridge and Mrs. Black were busy trying to organise seating arrangements according to classes. Mrs. Black was to teach the youngest group, 5 to 8-year-olds, and Mrs. Hartridge the next group, 8 to 11-year-olds. This included the twins, who were 10, and George, who was 11. Willie gazed at Mrs. Hartridge with pleasure. She was talking to Zack about his last school. Then she turned to him. "Now, William," she said, "how about you? Can you read and write?" His heart fell. He remained silent. "What did you say, William?" "No," he answered, staring at the floorboards. "Oh, I'm sorry about that, William. I would have liked you in my class." Willie rose as if in a daze, found a space on the floor and sat down. He didn't dare look at anyone. He felt utterly humiliated. That night it was difficult to look at Tom without his lips trembling. "I'm with the babies." "Oh? And whose class is Zacharias in, then? You're near enough the same age, aren't you?" "Yeah, but he can read." Willie paused. "And write." "I see," said Tom. "Mrs. Black will teach you to read," he added. "Did you learn anything today?" "Gas drill. We did gas mask drill. There aren't even enough pencils." Tom stood up. "We'll begin this evening," he said sharply. "That do?" "What?" asked Willie. "Learning to read and write. I'll teach you to write your name for a beginning," he said. Willie's eyes suddenly beamed. "Oh, mister," was all he could manage to say. Tom was surprised to find a lump in his own throat. "Go and have a run with Sammy. I'll get supper." Goodnight, Mr. Tom was written by Michelle Magorian and abridged by Maria Viga. The reader was David Briley. Goodnight, Mr. Tom, by Michelle Magorian, abridged by Maria Viga. Mr. Tom has taken the evacuee boy Willie into his home. Gradually, Willie is becoming more confident. Willie leapt out of bed. It was the beginning of his 6th day in Little Weirwold. He pulled back the blankets, peeled back the cotton and rubber sheets, and struggled down the ladder with them in his arms. "Morning," said Tom, appearing at the back door. They had decided the previous evening that every day Willie would get up a little earlier than usual to practice writing and reading before leaving for school. So, when he'd helped Tom wash his sheets and pyjama trousers, he sat down at the table and copied out, "I am William Beech, over and over again, until Tom finally persuaded him to go for a run and exercise Sammy. Willie returned, flushed and breathless. He stared at the table. On top of a red and white checkered tablecloth were two of the best plates, cups and saucers. In the centre stood a jam jar with flowers in it, and surrounding Willie's place were parcels and envelopes.
"Happy birthday," said Tom as Willie entered.
"Are they for me?" he asked in astonishment.
"'Tis where you usually sit, ain't it? Go on, open 'em. I'll read out who they're from."
Willie picked up a soft brown paper package and opened it. Inside lay a green woolen balaclava, a green sleeveless pullover, and a pair of navy blue corduroy shorts.
"Feel good, do they?"
beamed Tom when Willie tried on the shorts. "Yeah, they got pockets too," Willie said, plunging his hands deep into them. "What's that?"
"It's a balaclava. Keeps your head and ears warm when the wind's nippy," said Tom.
"Who gave it me?" Willie asked.
"I did," Tom said, "but Mrs. Fletcher made it."
"Ta," said Willie gratefully, and Tom urged him to open the rest of the presents. There was a book from Emilia Thorne, the librarian, called The Wind in the Willows, which Willie held tightly to his chest. A boy's comic annual from Dr. Nancy Little, a game of Snap from the vicar and his family, and 7 birthday cards. Willie was completely overcome. He sat down and stared at the gifts, quite speechless. Tom, meanwhile, took a large parcel out of the cupboard and gave it to him.
"That's me present from me to you."
"But you already gave me this," Willie said, indicating his pullover. "And these shorts."
"This is something different, like," said Tom.
Willie unwrapped the parcel and gave a start. There, before his eyes, lay one large and one small sketch-pad. There were 2 paintbrushes and 3 pots of paint, red, yellow and blue.
"If you mix them," said Tom, "you can also get orange, green and brown."
Willie swallowed a pain that had risen in the back of his throat.
"I take it you likes them?"
murmured Tom. He glanced out of the window at the oak tree below which Rachel and his baby son were buried. She used to hug and kiss him when he gave her presents. Since her death, he had never wanted to touch anything that might remind him of her. The odd thing was that after he had entered the paint shop, a wave of sadness had suddenly been lifted from out of him. "Thanks, Mr. Tom," Willie said. "I'll look after them real proper." After a birthday egg and bacon fry-up, Willie ran off to school. Tom met him outside at lunchtime, as there were no classes for him in the afternoon, and they visited the people who had given him presents. It would save the agony of trying to write thank-you letters. Willie didn't see any of his schoolmates, and he wondered where they were. Tom suggested they go for a stroll, but the sky suddenly became overcast.
"Drat them blimmin' clouds,"
he muttered. Willie said he wanted to draw, and Tom suddenly hit on an idea.
"How about the church?" he exclaimed.
"Yeah," said Willie, and they just managed to get into the church before the rain started. Tom left him to it and went home with Sammy. Some time later, as Willie worked totally oblivious to the outside world, a shadow fell across his sketch-pad. He jumped and turned round. It was Zack. "I say," he gasped, full of admiration, "that's magnificent. You must show the—" But he checked himself. "Didn't you hear me call you?" Willie shook his head. Zack became hesitant suddenly. Mr. Oakley says that he'd like to, talk about the time of day, that sort of thing. He's waiting for you now." "Is he?" said Willie, surprised. "Yes," said Zack impatiently. "Come on." When they eventually got to the front door, Zack said, "You go in first." Willie pushed open the door, and immediately the whole room erupted into "Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear William. Happy birthday to you." The twins, George, their mother and Tom were all standing in the front room singing, with Sammy sitting in the middle howling. It was obvious from Willie's astounded expression that this was a new experience to him. So this was what a birthday party was like. He had heard people at school talking about them, but... He looked towards Tom for help.
"You've got to blow the candles out, boy,"
he said, indicating the iced cake in the middle of all the other goodies. Everyone applauded when he blew them out. "I nearly forgot," Zack suddenly cried. "You haven't seen Will's picture." They gathered round to have a look. Tom peered over their heads. It was a copy of the carved eagle on the pulpit. Its strong, stubborn wings were swept back in a magnificent curve.
"That's a fine hand you have, William," he said quietly. "A fine hand."
Willie blushed crimson. After tea, they played several party games, and finally everyone returned home. "Mr. Tom," said Willie, touching his sleeve, "it's the best, it's the best." But he never finished. The excitement and food simply welled up inside him, and he vomited all over the carpet. One dull afternoon, several weeks later, Willie sat with George and the twins in Zack's tiny bedroom, watching him unpacking the big suitcase he'd been waiting for all day. It was from his parents in London. Suddenly, he pulled out an envelope with Zack written on it in bold lettering. "It's from Mummy and Daddy," he yelled. "Surprise, surprise," said George. "Come on, we've got to go home soon. You can read that later." Zack stuffed the letter in his pocket and dragged out another object from the case. It was stiff, black, and circular. He shook it, and in 1 second it became a shiny top hat. He placed it on his head and cocked it slightly to one side. Then he unwrapped a pair of shiny black patent shoes. "My taps," he said. "You've seen Fred Astaire dance, haven't you?" The others were all shaking their heads. "Will, you're a Londoner. You must have seen him at the pictures." "Me mum says that theatres and picture houses are dens of sin," Willie said. "Rot!" exclaimed Zack. "I was practically born in the theatre. I learned to walk and talk in the theatre, and I'm not sinful, am I? Look, there's only one way to explain tap. Here goes." And with that he danced around the room, his shoes tapping rhythmically on the floor, springing and twirling. He concluded the dance with a double spin and a sideways kick, and landed in a heap on the bed. His audience burst into applause. Suddenly, Mrs. Little appeared, brandishing a hefty piece of ceiling plaster in her hand. "I presume you are responsible for this," she said, looking directly at Zack. "Sorry, Aunt Nance," he said. Their meeting ended soon after that. The question as to where they should meet next time was answered by Willie. "There's my room," he said huskily. "I'll ask Mr. Tom." "Hello, Mr. Oakley," said Mrs. Fletcher. "You finished your duty early?"
"No, I decided to leave early tonight. Got one or two things to do," said Tom.
"Well, now you're here, you might as well take the jersey and socks," she said. "I finished them last night." Tom thanked her. "You heard from his mother yet?"
"I had a letter last week," Tom said. "The only one so far. Mostly about him being bad and me watching him." "I wish he would be bad. He says yes or dunno to every blessed thing I says." Mrs. Fletcher laughed. She looked steadily at Tom. Behind his scowling manner was a kindly old man. And if it hadn't been for the arrival of a rather insipid little boy, she might never have known. "I got to go," said Tom. Boy's got friends coming round tonight. Your George, for one.
So he said, smiled Mrs. Fletcher, and went to see him out. When Tom got back, Willie was waiting for him. "I've finished my reading book today," he said quickly, "and Mrs. Black says I can do joined-up writing. I might finish the last book by half-term, and then I'll be good enough for Mrs. Hartridge."
Good, said Tom. You've worked hard for it, and you're bright. Now, we got to get tea over with before your friends get here, he said.
Zack was the first to arrive wearing a multicoloured jersey. It was another of the presents his parents had sent him. "It's a bit bright," said George when he and the twins arrived. "You'll have Charlie Ruddles after you with blackout curtains," Carrie giggled. Zack turned to Willie. "I think it's fine," he said quietly, and Zack knew he was speaking truthfully. They all climbed up to Willie's bedroom. "Isn't it beautiful up here?" said Ginny. They all stared at the walls. There was a drawing of the oak tree, 2 brave attempts at Sammy, a painting of 5 children blackberrying, and several sketches of boots and flowers and half-eaten cakes. "You never done these," said George. "Sheer genius, aren't they?" said Zack. They were interrupted by knocking on the hatch. It was Tom with a large tray of lemonade, ginger snaps and hot chestnuts. "They has them in London when it's Christmas, but I never tasted them," yelled Willie. Tom looked round at their delighted faces and began to feel embarrassed. "You'd best eat them before they gets cold," he said, and disappeared down the steps. "I got some news," said George, biting into a chestnut. "We's going to have a big carol service in church on Christmas Eve. Mr. Bush says he could do with some extra voices." "I'd like to," said Zack, "but I never go to church, and I'm not even a Christian, so—" "Ain't you a Christian?" said Willie in alarm. "No, I thought you knew that. I'm Jewish." "Mr. Bush starts rehearsing this Thursday," said George. "I said I'd ask around." "I'll do it," blurted out Willie. "I'll sing." George beamed. "Right, and I'll give you a hand in reading if you get stuck," he said. When they had devoured what was on the tray and chatted some more, their meeting ended with everyone feeling satisfied. Tom looked at Willie. The last time he'd had so many children at the cottage, he'd been sick. Tonight, he looked healthily tired. Before he helped him into his pyjamas, Tom checked his arm and gently washed the last sore. "This time next week should be gone," he said. But Willie was almost asleep. When Willie awoke the next day, there was something altogether unusual about the morning. He couldn't work it out. It was only when he started automatically to strip the bed that he realized what it was. There was no need to wash his sheets that day. They were dry. I shall be reading some more from Goodnight, Mr. Tom next week. Goodnight, Mr. Tom, by Michelle Magorian, abridged by Maria Vigar. The story is set in the autumn of 1939, at the start of World War II. Mr. Tom is an elderly countryman used to living on his own. An evacuee from London, William Beech, has been billeted on him. The boy has been badly treated at home, but he's happy with Mr. Tom. November had been a damp and drizzly month, bringing shorter days and causing aggravation to those people who found it difficult to travel in the blackout. Tom had meanwhile dug up his turnips and set to work hedging, digging ditches, and helping out with the other farms when extra labour was needed. Willie would return from school to find the living room filled with the musky perfume of freshly cut branches burning in the range. The government had asked parents of evacuated children to make a monthly contribution towards their keep. Willie's mother wrote to Tom to say she couldn't afford the contribution, neither could she afford to visit him at Christmas. Some parents took their children back home, either because of financial problems or because they missed them too much. In Little Weirwold and the outlying countryside, all the evacuees had left, except for Willie and Zack, Robert and Christine King up at Hillbrook Farm, and the 4 Brown children at the vicarage. Little Weirwold was returning to a sort of normality. Events in the larger world continued to escalate. Hitler had escaped a bomb blast in a Munich beer cellar. German aircraft had parachuted mines into the Thames estuary. A British merchant cruiser had been sunk by German battleships. Finland had been invaded and Helsinki bombed. But these events of war didn't really disturb Little Weirwold, although it did create a local hero, David Hartridge, who had become a fully fledged pilot. It was now the first week in December. Tom was sitting at the table gluing coloured paper chains together, and Willie was painting clusters of holly silver. He held them up. "Pretty, ain't they?" he remarked. Tom put the chains down and stood up. Then he went and sat down in the armchair and stared into the open range. He was unusually quiet. "Shall I make us some tea?" suggested Willie. Grunted Tom, a little startled. "What?" Willie walked over to the kettle and filled it with water from the pitcher. "I'll make us some," he said. "Is you all right?" Tom looked a bit pale.
"Just had a bit of a wake-up, so to speak," he replied. "You heard about Mr. Bush being called up?" Willie nodded. "Well, I've been asked to take over the choir, for the concert, play the organ."
"Can you play, Mr. Tom?"
"Used to, when Rachel was alive."
"Who's Rachel?"
"A gentle-hearted, wild young girl I loved once," Tom said. "She died after she had a baby."
"What happened to the baby?"
"Died soon after, buried together under the oak tree."
He glanced at Willie.
"Same name as yours, too. William."
He gave a deep sigh.
"It's a long time since I touched that organ. It'll take a good bit of practice."
"You going to do it, then?"
Tom paused for a moment. "Yes," he said at last, and glanced across the table. "Is that me tea?"
"Yeah."
"Well, reckon I'll need it extra sweet tonight, eh, boy?" And he smiled.
Tom had gone to the church early. George and Willie ran along the pathway towards the back entrance. Already there were people seated in the benches on either side of the altar. Tom was sitting at the organ, a scowl on his face. Willie caught his eye and smiled at him. He knew the scowl meant he was just a bit shy. He and George found a place near Walter Bird, the oldest member of the choir. He was still wearing his tin hat and was the only one with a gas mask. Tom stood up and gave 2 short taps with his hand on the top of the organ.
"We'll begin with Hark the Herald," he said.
He waited until everyone had found their places before playing the short introduction. After the first few notes, he stopped. No one was singing. He leaned around the organ.
"What's the matter?" he inquired.
"We was just listening to you playing
croaked Walter.
"You kept in tune, didn't you?"
Tom grunted.
"I ain't here to listen to myself," he said. "Once more."
The men suppressed a grin between themselves. Still the same short-tempered Mr. Oakley, they thought. Tom played the introduction, then they joined in.
"You call that singing?" he interrupted gruffly. "Sounds like a dirge."
"A dirge, Mr. Oakley," interspersed Mr. Miller, his balding head shining with perspiration.
"This is to be a carol service, not a funeral. Lift them up with your voices, don't bury them."
George gave a short laugh. Tom glared at him. "Once again," he said, turning to everyone. They lifted up their books. Mr. Miller wiped his face with a handkerchief. "And this time," Tom continued, "I want all of yous to sing it out them doors and through the village." They sang it with fervour twice through, and then, as a contrast, followed it with a gentle rendition of Silent Night. The rehearsal ended with a rousing version of "O Come All Ye Faithful." "I think that'll do for tonight," said Tom. The members of the choir began to disperse, their voices drifting away into the distance. George went up to Tom. "It were a real good rehearsal, Mr. Oakley," he said. "Real good, weren't it, Will?" Willie nodded. George said good night and then hurried out to catch up with his elder brother. Willie leant on the organ. "I'll play you something I ain't played in years. Don't know if I can remember it all. It were one of Rachel's favourites." Unlike the jaunty tunes of the carols, these notes were long and lingering. They throbbed and shook the frame of the organ, sometimes dying to the gentlest and saddest sounds, only to crescendo and fall again. Willie had never heard anything so beautiful. "Mr. Tom," he said, his eyes welling with emotion, "that were real fine." Tom grunted. "Thank you, boy. Must admit I enjoyed it myself." There were usually 15 pupils in Mrs. Hartridge's class, ranging from 9 to 14. On this particular Monday there were only 10 present. 3 children, who had a 2-mile walk to school, hadn't arrived because of the snow, and the other 2, Christine and Robert King, who had been staying at Hillbrook Farm, had now gone back to London. Their mother had come for them yesterday morning because she said they were being used as unpaid labour. Mrs. Hartridge explained all this to her class, but it came as no surprise to them. Robert King had fallen asleep in history because he was so tired, and Christine King had told Ginny that Mr. Barnes threatened to have their dog put down if they didn't work hard enough. "Now," said Mrs. Hartridge, turning to Willie, who was sitting just in front of her desk, "I'm sure we would all like to welcome William Beech to our class. We know what excellent progress you've made and how hard you've worked, William." Willie blushed and looked at the new books Mrs. Hartridge had put on his desk. A history and geography textbook, a spelling and arithmetic book, and what thrilled him most of all, his own pen. The first lesson after prayers was arithmetic. Willie was asked to work on his 7 times table. After that, they had an English language lesson, which was all about nouns. Soon, Willie's head was spinning. He turned to look at Zack, who winked at him. "Don't look so worried, William," Mrs. Hartridge said reassuringly. She leaned forward from her desk. "It won't all come at once. It's only your first day." "Everything has its own time," Willie said quietly, and blushed. "That's what Mr. Tom says." She gave him a warm smile. "That's right." At lunchtime, Zack said, "Let's go and eat in my shelter. It's freezing out here." And they ran towards the shelter, where Aunt Nance brought them cups of hot blackcurrant juice. George hadn't come to school in the morning. They knew why. It was because his brother Michael had been reported missing, believed dead. A memorial service had been held for him the previous day, and the village had given the vicar money towards a plaque to be placed in the church. When lunch was over and they returned to their class, George was sitting at his desk. He looked pale and swollen-eyed and wore a black armband. He smiled weakly when he saw them come in. The afternoon lessons finished with a Hans Andersen fairy tale. Willie sank back after his day's efforts to listen to the story. Today he had answered questions on Treasure Island and got 8 out of 10 right. He had learnt about the habits of squirrels, badgers and moles. He had begun his 7 times table and completed his first painting, which Mrs. Hartridge said she would put up on the wall. After school, Zack and Willie sauntered slowly homewards and talked endlessly outside the Littles' dilapidated gate. Willie's first day in Mrs. Hartridge's class was over. One Friday morning in the first week of March, Willie looked out of his window to find that the snow had thawed completely. The river was almost bursting its banks, and through the still naked trees Willie could make out the chimney of Spooky Cot. It was a beautiful day. He breathed in the cool, crisp air and was filled with so much energy that he felt like the swollen river.
"You looks full of beans,"
Tom said to him. He was in the air raid shelter, pumping out water.
"You might as well go for a run now. I'll have your breakfast started when you come back."
Willie slung on his gumboots, overcoat and balaclava, while Sam twirled round and round his ankles. "Yahoo!" he yelled. "Yahoo! Yahoo!" sprinting and laughing along the lane. Eventually he and Sammy turned back. His balaclava had fallen back from his face, exposing flushed cheeks and 2 red ears. That Friday was to be a special day. Willie and his best friends had arranged to meet at Zack's after school. So when school ended, the 5 of them fled to the Littles' cottage to discuss the expedition to Spooky Cot, the local haunted cottage, which was to take place on Saturday. Willie sang as he walked down the lane back to Tom's cottage. He was still bursting with energy. He ran in, tore off his coat and burst into the front room. Tom was standing by the range. He glanced at Willie and listened quietly to his chatter. He didn't make any comment. He gazed down at Sammy, who was slumped miserably at his feet. Willie was untying his boots when he looked up and noticed that Tom was holding a letter. "What's the matter?" he asked Tom.
"It's from your mother," Tom said. "She's ill. She wants you to go back for a while."
Goodnight, Mr. Tom was written by Michelle Magorian and abridged by Maria Vega. The reader was David Briley. The producer was Peter Fossard. The music was by Roger Lim of the BBC Radiophonic Workshop. Goodnight, Mr. Tom by Michelle Magorian. Abridged by Maria Vega. Willie, the evacuee, has been happy staying with Mr. Tom, but his mother has asked for him to be sent back to London. Tom and Willie stood on the platform at Weirwold station. A blast of wind swept into Willie's face, and he shivered. Tom squeezed his shoulder firmly.
"Don't forget to write, William. And if you changes your mind about them paints, you just let on and I'll post them."
Willie shook his head. "They belongs at home. I mean, at your place. Then they'll be there when I come back." He touched Tom's hand. "I will come back, Mr. Tom, won't I?" His mother had written to say that she only wanted him to stay with her for a while, till she felt better.
"You might feel different when you're home. I expect your mother's missed you. Probably why she didn't write much. And, William."
"Yeah?"
"Don't expect too much too soon. You ain't seen each other for nearly 6 months, so things might be a bit awkward, like, for a while."
Willie nodded. A cloud of smoke drifted upwards from a clump of trees in the distance, and they watched it getting nearer and heard the sound of the approaching train growing louder. Tom picked Sammy up in his arms.
"Now, you takes care of yourself, boy. You keeps up that old drawing. You've a fine gift. If you runs out of pencils, you lets me know.
Willie nodded, and his eyes became misty. He blinked. Tears fell down his cheeks. He gave a sniff and brushed them quickly away. "Oh, miss you." Tom swallowed a lump in his throat.
Me too, boy.
The train seemed full of soldiers and sailors. One of them let Willie squeeze into a place by the window. He sat down, placed his rucksack onto his knees, and hung onto it grimly. After a while, the soldier began to chat to him because he could see that Willie was a bit miserable. He asked him where he was going and whether his dad had been called up. "I ain't got a dad," Willie told him. Then the soldier changed the subject and asked what was in Willie's rucksack. "Presents, clothes and books," Willie said. And then he showed the soldier one of his sketch pads.
"Oh, you can really draw," he said, surprised. "Oh, these are good. These are really good. Your mother must be terribly proud of you," he said, handing the pad back.
Would his mother be proud of him? He imagined her waiting for him on the platform. In his head she was a mixture of Mrs. Fletcher and Mrs. Hartridge. He would lean out of the window, and she would wave back, smiling and laughing. Then he remembered that she was supposed to be ill. Maybe a warden or vicar would come to meet him instead, and take him to her bedside, and she would touch him and say how proud she was of him. He leaned back and closed his eyes. The strain of all the goodbyes had exhausted him. He wondered what Zack was doing. In his pocket he had the first 2 verses of an epic poem that Zack had written especially for him. He said that he'd finish it and send it on to him by post or by pigeon. When Willie stepped off the train in London, the cold night air hit him sharply. The platform was swarming with soldiers. He looked around, but there was no sign of his mother. He buttoned up his coat and pulled his balaclava over his head. When he saw her, she was standing next to a pile of sandbags, a thin, gaunt woman. "Mum!" he cried, running over to her. "Mum, it's me!" She glanced down and was about to tell him to clear off when she recognized him. Yes, it was Willie, but he'd altered so much. She had been looking for a thin boy dressed in grey. Here stood an upright, well-fleshed, well-dressed boy with a mass of shiny hair above his forehead and round pink cheeks. It was a great shock to her. "I'm awfully pleased to see you, Mum. I've such a lot to tell you, and there's me pictures like." She was startled at his peculiar mixture of accents and his voice, which sounded louder. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm not very well, and I'm a bit tired. I wasn't expecting such a change in you." Willie thought it was his mother that had changed. He looked at her face. She was very pale, almost yellow in colour, and her lips were so thin and blue that it seemed as if every ounce of blood had been drained from them. He glanced at her body. She was wearing a long black coat, fawn stockings, and smart lace-up heeled shoes. A small shopping bag was leaning against her leg. He touched her arm gently. "I'll carry that for you, Mum," he said, picking it up. She spun round and gave his hand a sharp slap. "I'll tell you what I wants when I wants it, and you know I don't approve of touching." "Sorry," he muttered. They stood silently and awkwardly as the large, noisy station roared around them. Willie felt his heart sinking, and the spark of hope that he had held was fast dissolving. But then he remembered. Mr. Tom had said that it would take time to get used to each other. Mrs. Beech, meanwhile, surveyed her small son. Her mind was racing. She'd be lenient with him for the moment. After all, this was his first evening back.
Let's go and get the bus, she said at last. You can take me bag. Thanks, Mum, said Willie, and he smiled.
She couldn't remember ever having seen him smile before. It frightened her. It threatened her authority. Presently she said to him,
There's something I've been meaning to tell you, Willie. It's a little surprise. We have to creep into the house. No one must see you. It's like a game, she said,
relieved at having thought of the idea.
No one must see me? No. Why?
She frowned. Then she said,
You'll see. It's a surprise.
When they got to Deptford, Mrs. Beech led Willie round the back of their street. She told him to hide in an alleyway and watch the front door. She went on ahead to open up. As soon as he heard her cough, he was to hurry indoors after her. Strange game, thought Willie. A few moments later, he stumbled into their front room, which was still in darkness. There was a strong smell coming from somewhere, as though an animal had opened its bowels or peed.
Is it a dog?
He asked.
Is what a dog?
The surprise, Willie said.
What surprise? His mother began.
Oh, that. No, it's not a dog. She turned the light on. The room was darker than Willie remembered. He stared at the grey walls. On the mantelpiece there were 2 prayer books still in the same position. In addition to the newspaper over the window, it was also crisscrossed with brown tape.
What's that for?
What have I said about asking questions? She shouted, slamming her hand on the table. Another awkward silence followed. Willie turned away from her. And then he saw it, a wooden box on a chair in the corner.
That's the surprise, she said.
He walked over to it and put his hand inside.
A baby, he whispered. But why?
He stopped and he turned to her.
It's got tape on its mouth. I know that. I didn't want her to make a noise while I was out. It's a secret, see? Is it...
He hesitated.
Is it yours?
Ours, she said.
A present?
Yes.
Who from?
Jesus. He glanced down at the baby. She was very smelly.
I'll pick her up, Willie said.
Don't you dare.
But she's crying. She's just trying to get attention. She must learn discipline. But she's only a baby.
Sit down, she yelled at him. Willie sat at the table.
Has she a name?
She brought her fist down hard on the table.
No, and that's enough questions from you, or you'll feel the belt around you.
She leaned back in her chair.
Now, let's see what you've got in that bag.
He unfastened the straps of the rucksack and slowly began to pull everything out. It felt as though he was stripping naked in front of her. All the things that were precious and important to him were now being placed under her scrutiny. She sat, ashen-faced, and watched him unpack. When he'd finished, she spoke in a quiet, controlled manner. Now, I'll ask the questions, and you'll give me the answers, and no backchat. Where did you get them clothes and boots you're wearing?
Mr. Oakley and Mrs. Fletcher.
You steal them?
No, Mum, they were presents.
You begged.
No, I never.
Don't argue, I said you begged.
I've brought you a present, Mum, Willie said, hoping this might please her. I drew it myself. It's a picture of where I lived.
She looked at it. It was a drawing of the graveyard and the church, with trees in the background.
Don't lie to me. I'm not, Willie insisted. Look, these are mine too.
He tried to show her his sketch pad, but she pushed it away.
I shall either burn these or give them to charity.
Willie stared at her in dismay. And these, indicating the books, sweets and coloured pencils,
presents. More presents, Willie? Do you expect me to believe that strangers would give you presents? They ain't strangers, Mum, they're friends. Friends? I'd like to know who these so-called friends are. Are they churchgoers? Oh, yes, Mum. George is in the choir. So am I. But Ginny and Carrie... Girls? You play with girls, after all I've said about that? But they're fine, and they goes to church. They all does. Except Zack. Who's Jack? Why doesn't he go to church? Some instinct told him he was approaching dangerous ground. He tried to evade the question. They ain't got one of his sort in the village. He thinks there's more God in the fields and the sky and in loving people than in churches and synagogues. In what? Did you say synagogues? Yes, that's what they call their churches. Who do? Jews. Zack's Jewish. She let out a frightened scream. You've been poisoned by the devil, don't you know that? She hit him savagely across the face. He reeled backwards and crashed onto the floor. Zack says Jesus was a Jew, Willie stammered. You blasphemer! She screamed. You blasphemer! Something heavy hit him across the head, and he sank into a cold darkness. He woke up with a start, shivering with cold. He began to stretch his cramped legs, but they hurt. Opening his eyes, he looked around in the darkness. He knew immediately where he was. He had been locked under the stairs. He peered through the crack at the side of the door. It was pitch black. His mother had probably gone to bed. He shivered. His boots were gone, so were his jersey and shorts. He tugged at his waist. His vest had been sewn to his underpants. Suddenly, Willie thought of his bed in Mr. Tom's house, and a wave of despair swept through him. Mr. Tom, he whispered with a sob. Mr. Tom, I want you, Mr. Tom. Goodnight, Mr. Tom was written by Michelle Magorian and abridged by Maria Vega. The reader was David Briley. Goodnight, Mr. Tom, by Michelle Magorian, abridged by Maria Vega. Tom waited patiently for Willie's letter. He himself had written 4, and he knew Zack had sent several also, but there was no reply to any of them. One night, he awoke violently from a nightmare. In the dream, he had been locked into a tiny space with no air inside. It was as if he was being buried alive. But it was the voice that had awoken him. He thought he'd heard William calling out to him for help. He woke with a start, only to find Sammy standing by his bedside, panting. The dream preyed on his mind. On his way out, Tom met May Thorne delivering mail. "Mr. Oakley," she said, "I've a telegram. It's for Annie Hartridge. Her baby's due soon. I'd like to wait till the midwife is visiting in case it's bad news, but it's against regulations." Tom frowned. "You seen Mrs. Fletcher?" "Don't like to disturb her." "I'll go and see her now. Suggest she pops in." As he watched the midwife put her coat on, he asked, "Them trains to London, they run on Fridays, don't they?" "Yes, that's right," she said. "It's Friday today, isn't it?" he said abruptly.
I'm going to get on that train, Mrs. Fletcher, and what's more, I'm going to get on it today.
It was 9 o'clock that night when Tom and Sammy clambered out of the train in London and stood on the platform feeling totally dazed. The noise was deafening. Hundreds of uniformed figures swirled about him, shouting to each other. Spotting the ticket man, Tom went to hand in his ticket and asked directions. Neither the ticket man nor the warden nearby could understand his accent, and it wasn't until he showed them the address written on a piece of paper that they both chorused, "Oh, you mean Deptford," and proceeded to give him directions. It was nearly midnight when Tom finally got to Willie's neighbourhood, an area full of small, dilapidated tenements. Suddenly, a loud siren wailed across the sky. He didn't know what to do. He had read about communal shelters in newspapers, but he had no idea where the nearest tube station was. People began to move quickly, grumbling and cursing. He felt a hand on his arm. It was a warden. "You seem to be lost, sir. Come with me," he said. Tom picked Sammy up and ran after him towards a long brick building with a large S painted above the door. The warden, Tom discovered, was caretaker of the local school. "You looks like a countryman."
I am. I've come looking for a boy what stayed with me, like. Evacuee he was.
"You haven't come looking for a runaway," said the warden, astounded.
He didn't run away. He had a letter from his mother saying she was ill, like, and could he come back for a while. I ain't heard nothing since.
The warden rubbed his chin and said perhaps the boy had just forgotten about Tom once he'd got back home.
"Perhaps,"
said Tom.
"It's just that I ain't heard from him for 4 weeks, and I'd like to see that the boy's well. Then I can rest peaceful, like."
The warden was taken aback by Tom's genuine concern and asked to see the address. He looked up startled from the piece of paper. "I know number 12, he said. "Willie Beech."
You seen him?
"Not since last September, when he left with a school party for the station. Quiet boy, didn't mix, no friends. Bullied by the other kids. Sitting target, really. His mother thinks she's a cut above everyone. Over religious type. Bible thumping, you know what I mean?" Tom nodded. "Still, it's part of me job to check who's here and who's not in case of bombing, and I ain't been notified." He called across the shelter to a fat woman, Glad, who was a neighbour of Mrs. Beech, and she came over to them. The warden explained that Tom was looking for Willie, and had she seen any sign of him. "What are you on about? His mother said he was wicked and was being sent to an home for bad boys." Then Glad remembered that Mrs. Beech had told her that she was going to the coast for a Bible meeting. "Told me last week, don't know why. She don't usually condescend to even look at me. Why weren't I informed?" The warden gave a despairing sigh and said, "Mr. Oakley, do you still want to see the place?" Tom nodded. Later, Tom and the warden stood outside number 12. They peered in at the window. "Deserted?" remarked the warden. Tom's attention was drawn to Sammy, who had become very agitated. He was whining and scratching at the front door. Tom jiggled the doorknob. "You can't do that, sir. That's against the law," said the warden. "I think there's someone in there," Tom said urgently. A policeman, attracted by the commotion, joined them. Sammy leapt up and hurled himself at the door. "I'd like to enter, officer," said the warden. "I'm a bit worried about the mother and the boy who live in there." They decided to break the door down. It crashed open, and they were greeted with a stench so vile as to almost set them reeling, as if an animal had died and was rotting somewhere. Sammy ran immediately to a tiny door below the stairway, barking loudly and scrabbling at it with his paws. The warden lifted the latch and swung the door open. The smell was so rank that he turned his face away to retch. The policeman shone his torch into the hole. The small alcove stank of stale urine and vomit. A thin, emaciated boy with matted hair and skin like parchment was tied to a length of copper piping. He held a small bundle in his arms. His scrawny limbs were covered with sores and bruises, and he sat in his own excrement. He shrank from the light. The warden reached out and touched him, and he let out a frightened whimper. An empty baby's bottle stood by his legs. "You give me that baby, son," said the warden, but the boy tightened himself up, his eyes wide with fear. Tom asked the policeman if he could talk to the boy.
"It's Mr. Tom," he said gently. "I was worried about you, so me and Sammy come looking for you."
Willie looked in his direction.
"Don't worry, boy," he said reassuringly. "You just hang on tight to that old bundle, and I'll untie you and get you out."
Slowly and laboriously, Will was freed and gently put onto a stretcher and then into the ambulance. Tom and the warden travelled with him. "I'd like to get my hands on that woman. She must be off her nut." The warden looked intently at the bundle that was still in Will's arms. Tom gave the warden a nod and said quietly to Will,
"William, can I have a look at the little un?"
Tom drew the folds of the cold bundle to one side. The baby had been dead for some time. It was tinged with a greyish hue. Then Tom said,
"Will, how's about giving the baby a blanket of its own?"
Willie released his grip. "Hurts," he gasped as he attempted to release his arms.
"Takes your own time," urged Tom.
Will smiled as he recognized the familiar saying.
"And keep breathing, boy."
"Looks like he found you in the nick of time," said the nurse, and gave Will a warm smile. A young hospital doctor briefly examined Will and said, "Take him up to the children's ward. Clean him up. Bit late for stitches. He'd better have a tetanus jab." Tom stood up with Will in his arms, ready to follow the nurse. "I'll look after your dog," said the warden. When they were outside the children's ward, the nurse said, "You can't come any further. Regulations, I'm afraid." Will looked terrified when Tom handed him over to her.
"I'm staying here, Will. I'll be in that big hallway. I won't be far."
"I've given the receptionist all the details," said the warden when Tom returned to the lobby. "I have to make a police report now," he added.
"I want to take him back to Little Weirwold," Tom said.
"Don't think you can do that. They'll have to find the mother first. Probably prison for her."
"And Will?"
"Oh, children's home, I suppose."
"I'm taking him back," said Tom firmly.
The warden knew better. It was some time in the afternoon when a nurse finally came up to Tom to verify who he was and say he could go and see Will. "He's seen a psychiatrist this morning," said the nurse.
"A what?"
said Tom. "A man who cares for sick minds."
"There's nothing wrong with his mind."
"He keeps suddenly screaming. We've had to keep sedating him, putting him to sleep."
"Why? Maybe he needs to scream,"
Tom told her. "We have to consider the other children in the ward, Mr. Tom." Will was propped up by pillows. His hair had been shaved off completely, revealing an array of multicoloured cuts and bruises. He was well scrubbed and smelt of disinfectant.
"Didn't recognize you with your army cut," said Tom.
Will smiled weakly. "How long does I have to stay here?"
"Not long. I think you look well patched up."
He felt Will's thin fingers. They were cold. He gave them a blow and a rub between his hands. Will leaned awkwardly on one elbow. "This bloke come to see me."
"Doctor, was he?"
"I dunno. He said he was from a home, and that I'd be going there to get better." He clutched at Tom's arm. "Can't I come back with you?"
"Course you can. Don't know the law side, mind, but we'll get round it somehow," said Tom. He was interrupted by the nurse, who said he had to go now. When he tried to protest, the ward sister arrived and ordered him out. "I'll be in the hall, Will," he called out. "I won't be far."
He went to check on Sammy. He'd had to leave him tied to the railings in the courtyard.
"What we going to do, Sam?" he said. "We got to do something. They wants to put him in an home."
He looked up at the sky.
"Oh, Rachel," he said half aloud, "what would you do?"
And in his mind she seemed to flash her dark eyes at him. "Kidnap him," she said laughingly. About 3 hours later, he was standing outside the children's ward with a blanket under his arm. He peered quickly inside and saw that the night nurse was asleep at her desk. Checking the corridor first, he quickly slipped into the ward. He found Will well knocked out by the drugs. He wrapped him in the blanket and stuck one of his pillows under the sheets in his place. Carefully, he dodged past the nurse's desk. Just as he was coming out into the courtyard, 3 ambulances arrived. In the general confusion that followed, Tom managed to turn a corner unnoticed and find Sammy. Sammy began to bark excitedly.
"No!"
whispered Tom urgently. Quickly, he took some clothes for Will out of his haversack, dressed him, grabbed Sammy's makeshift lead, and with Will in his arms, he approached the hospital gates.
"Oi, mister!"
someone called. It was the warden. Tom's heart pounded, but he didn't stop.
"You got the boy, then?"
Tom nodded.
"Good on you."
"Taking him back to the country?" Tom nodded again, waved, and kept on walking till he was past the gates and on his way to Weirwold. Goodnight, Mr. Tom was written by Michelle Magorian and abridged by Maria Viga. The reader was David Briley. The producer, Peter Fossard. The music was by Roger Lynn of the BBC Radiophonic Workshop. Goodnight, Mr. Tom, by Michelle Magorian, abridged by Maria Viga.
"I know what I done was wrong, Dr. Little,
But I couldn't let him be taken to a home," Tom said. He gazed at Will, who was sound asleep on the little sofa, still wrapped in the blanket that he'd used to smuggle him out of the London hospital.
"They are bound to track him down sooner or later,"
said the doctor, looking over his ever-sliding spectacles.
"Nonsense," said his wife. "They're too busy to go chasing evacuees. They didn't even know he had returned to London."
"The sores will heal, Tom," the doctor then added. "They healed before. It's the wounds inside that take the longest time to heal."
"I know that. I'll give him my support when he needs it."
"Me too," cried a voice behind him. It was Zack, standing at the doorway in his pyjamas. "I knew you'd bring him back," he said fiercely, tears in his eyes. "I knew it, Mr. Tom." Will's recovery was slow and painful. Day by day, a tremendous fatigue swept through him and drained his entire body. Even the smallest task, cleaning his teeth or holding a book, would exhaust him into yet another deep sleep. But the nights were the worst, bringing with them horrendous dreams from which he would wake up screaming, while the sweat trickled down him in never-ending streams. During one particular dream, Will suddenly froze on the bed, his body completely outstretched, and he let out the wildest, most terrifying scream Tom had ever heard. It shook him to his very bowels. It sounded like a baby crying in despair, an old forgotten scream that must have been swallowed down years before. Suddenly, Will became quiet. His lips had turned blue. Tom raised him to a sitting position and gently stroked his back.
Keep breathing, boy. Keep breathing.
Will gulped in a fresh lungful of air and began to vomit violently. After this incident, he began to sleep more easily. He had reached the climax of his nightmares, and they no longer haunted him. One morning, several days later, he woke feeling refreshed. A smell of bacon and eggs drifted through the floorboards. "Mr. Tom!" he yelled. "Mr. Tom!" Tom appeared at the hatchway, beaming.
"You're looking good, boy. You got colour in your cheeks."
Will smiled.
"Breakfast in bed, sir," Tom said cheerily. "I takes it you're hungry."
Will nodded and grinned. Minutes later, Zack arrived. He could tell immediately from Tom's bright smile that Will was better. Half running, half stumbling, he flung himself up the ladder and into Will's bedroom. Tom stood in the hallway, listening to their yells of delight. Finally, Zack settled at the bottom of Will's bed and began to give him all the news. He told him how much he'd been missed at school, especially by George, and the twins, of course, and that Mrs. Hartridge had had a baby girl. "A baby?" Will repeated, suddenly very pale. "What's the matter?" Zack asked him, and offered to call Mr. Tom. Will said he was fine, and so he seemed to be, until Zack mentioned that the Grange might be turned into a maternity hospital. "It's a place where women have their babies." Will changed pallor again. "Don't they come from Jesus?" he said. "Babies?" "Of course not," Zack replied. "Oh, you don't know about sex." Will blushed. "I know it's something dirty, and you goes to hell for it." "Rot!" exclaimed Zack. "We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for sex. It's what happens between men and women when they love each other." "Can't a lady have a baby on her own?" "No," said Zack. "Are you sure?" "Yes. My parents told me, and they don't lie." When Zack left shortly after, Tom encouraged Will to say what was troubling him. "It's about me mum's baby," he said, searching Tom's face.
"I think you know already,"
Tom said quietly. "She's dead, ain't she?" Tom nodded. "My fault," Will choked out. "I killed her. I made her die."
"How?"
She cried, and I nursed her," Will gasped. "I held her real good. I gives her the milk in the bottle. Then there wasn't no more." He hesitated.
"And your fault? The milk running out?"
"But I should have got out," Will insisted. "I waited. I thought me mum would be back, only—" He couldn't get the words out.
"Only she never did. That what you're saying?"
Tom asked him. He nodded.
"You was tied up, Will. You couldn't get out. None of it's your fault."
Then Will told Mr. Tom what Zack had said about babies, and asked if that meant his mother had been with a man to have her baby.
"Yes," said Tom.
"She lied," Will told him. "Why did she lie? She said men and ladies going with each other were a sin." Tom took out his pipe and began to stuff tobacco in it.
"I has a feeling that your mother was very ill."
And he tried to explain that there was a kind of sickness of the mind that some people suffered from, usually unhappy people.
"Reckon your mother is a bit like that."
Will looked at him. "Mr. Tom, I don't want to go back to her, even if she says she's ill."
"You won't go back to her. Authorities wouldn't allow it."
"Why did you kidnap me then?"
"They were going to put you in a children's home. I wanted you back here."
Will beamed. "Mr. Tom, I love you." As soon as he'd uttered those words, he felt a wave of warmth flooding into his stomach and through his chest. Mr. Tom's face became flushed. He cleared his throat.
"I love you too, boy."
As May flew into June, Will steadily grew in strength. He remained indoors, happy just to draw and read. Zack, George and the twins came to visit him, but he tended to fall asleep mid-conversation, and would wake to find that they had gone, leaving a little pile of fruit and comics beside him. Gradually he ventured out into the front garden. He and Tom would carry the large wooden table outside so that he could lay out his paints and brushes on it. The constant fresh air increased his appetite, and as he ate, so his energy returned. Meanwhile, in London, Neville Chamberlain had resigned as Prime Minister, and a plump, bald man of 65 had taken his place. His name was Winston Churchill. Soon afterwards, the inhabitants of Little Weirwold were shaken by the news of Dunkirk. The British Expeditionary Force had been driven back to the coast of France by the Germans, and thousands of troops had to be evacuated by sea to Folkestone. Hundreds of ordinary people who had boats risked their lives to help in the evacuation. Even Sir from the Grange and his son had been involved in the operation using their motorboat. The Grange was no longer to be a maternity hospital, but a convalescent home for the wounded soldiers. On the last Saturday in June, Tom and Will decided to take a stroll and enjoy the sunshine. They called by for Zack, and found him covered in oil and surrounded by soiled rags and tools. Propped upside down on its handlebars was an old bicycle. Zack was attempting to restore it. "This is the first mechanical thing I've ever done in my whole life," he announced. After a brief chat, Tom and Will went on their own, leaving Zack to his bike. When they returned to the cottage 2 hours later, Zack was waiting for them by the gate. "I've actually fixed it," he said proudly. Then he added with a broad grin, "I say, Mr. Tom, how far is it to the sea?" Mr. Tom had decided that what the boys needed was a holiday. The roads to Salmouth were very narrow. Most of the holiday-makers who ventured there were cyclists, like themselves, or ramblers. Zack was riding his own brightly painted, restored bike, and Will was second rider on Tom's old tandem. They found rooms with a middle-aged widow, Mrs. Clarence, who was delighted to have them stay, and as soon as they had deposited their bags and bikes, they set off for a close-up view of the sea. The nearest beach was a mixture of sand and pebbles. They sat there, gazing out at the bay. Will had imagined that the sea would terrify and engulf him, but instead he felt surprisingly calm. It took a couple of days before he ventured into the water with the help of Tom and Zack, but in no time at all he learned to float. And he relaxed so well he almost fell asleep once. At the end of a few days, Will had learned to do the breaststroke, and Zack could count up to 10 while floating. They lay in silence one night, the moon shining its beams across the whitewashed floorboards. "Ain't it a fine sound?" whispered Will. "What?" muttered Zack. "The waves." The only dark clouds in their 2-week holiday were the news bulletins on the wireless. They reported that southwest London had been blitzed, and that sirens had not been sounded, which had resulted in many deaths. Zack became very worried about his parents. His mother was an ambulance driver, and his father was with the auxiliary fire service. He was desperate to know that they were safe. The day before they were due to leave Salmouth, Tom and Zack managed to phone the Littles and heard that Zack's parents had left messages to say they were well and would write to him soon. That afternoon they took their last bike ride round the village, and in the evening Zack and Will took a stroll by the beach. They chatted for ages about what they would do when they grew up. Zack was determined to be a world-famous entertainer. Will said he just wanted to paint. The day after their return to Little Weirwold, Will ran into the kitchen happily to find Tom sitting with a group of visitors. There was a lady in a green coat and hat, a middle-aged man in a pullover and corduroys, the local policeman, and the warden from Deptford. "This the boy?" asked the policeman. The warden looked puzzled. "I recognise you," he said to Tom, "but this ain't Willie Beech, surely?" "William," corrected Will. The warden frowned at him. "William," said the woman softly, "we've brought you some rather bad news. It concerns your mother." Willie looked startled. "I'm afraid your mother is dead. She killed herself." Will gazed at her in disbelief. The lady went on to explain that she was from a children's home and that she had come to offer him a place there. "No," he said shakily, "this is my home, and I'm staying here." Now, son," said the warden, "that ain't the way to talk. You don't have much choice in the matter. Your Mr. Oakley has not been keeping to the law. Kidnapping's a serious offence." "Will," said the policeman, "we'd like you to go up to your room for a while." "I won't go with you," said Will. "Even if you tie me up and put me in prison, I'll come back here." And with that, he slammed the door behind him. Goodnight, Mr. Tom was written by Michelle Magorian and abridged by Maria Viga. The reader was David Briley. The programme was produced by Peter Fossard. Goodnight, Mr. Tom, by Michelle Magorian, abridged by Maria Viga. The front door slammed. "Will, they's gone," Tom said. "You can come down now." "I ain't going to apologise, like," Will muttered, when they were both downstairs in the kitchen. Tom sat in the armchair. "I'm sorry about your mother." Will forgot his anger for a moment and said, "I don't know why she did it. Was it because of me and the baby?" "Partly. But it weren't your fault. She was ill. She couldn't cope, see?" "What's going to happen to me, then?" Tom looked up at him. "I'm adopting you." "What?" exclaimed Will. "You ain't got no other relations, boy. The authorities have checked, so I'm adopting you. That man in the jersey and corduroys, he were one of them psychiatrists. He said that any fool could see this was the best place for you, and the others agreed, so—" "You mean," Willie interrupted, "you'll be my father, like?" Tom nodded. "Suppose I will." Will threw his arms around him, and together they danced and cavorted across the room, shouting and yelling, while Sammy whirled around their ankles, chasing his tail in a lunatic fashion. The first day back at school after the summer break was a Thursday. Will and Zack had agreed to meet early and have a walk through the woods before school. The morning air felt clean and crisp, and all the fields and hedgerows were covered in a layer of sparkling dew. Presently they reached the small river. Zack stared gloomily into the water. On the wireless there'd been more reports of heavy bombing in London. "I wish I could visit my parents, just to see if they're safe. I haven't heard from them for ages. I think the war's started properly now." "There might be a letter waiting for you now," Will said, trying to encourage him. But there wasn't. They checked on their way to school. Miss Thorne was now in charge of the school. She had taken over from Mr. Bush, and today she waited to welcome them all back with a new teacher, Mr. Geoffrey Saunderton. He was replacing Mrs. Hartridge. Mr. Saunderton was known to some of the children. He lived up at the Grange. He had been wounded in battle and was discharged from active service. Miss Thorne explained that he was an artist. Will's face suddenly lit up. Teachers and children were busy discussing the term's nature project when they were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Aunt Nance. Miss Thorne said to Zack gently, "You've to go home." Zack rose quietly and left without a word. Will glanced at Miss Thorne, who caught his eye and quickly turned away. "Right," she said briskly. "Let's see how your spelling has deteriorated over the summer holidays." When Will went to see Zack after school, he found him bent over a small suitcase, packing. His eyes were pink and swollen. "I'm catching the Friday train to London. Mother doesn't want me to, but I begged her to let me." Zack's father was in hospital, having been seriously injured in one of the bomb blasts. "I have to see him, in case I never see him again." They spent a miserable afternoon together. George and the twins joined them later, but the waiting only aggravated Zack's sense of frustration and helplessness. He just wanted to get away. One day after Zack's sudden departure was Will's 10th birthday, Saturday, the 7th of September, 1940. A small gathering congregated at the cottage to help celebrate his day with homemade cakes from Mrs. Fletcher, homemade ginger beer from Mrs. Little, presents from everybody, and games courtesy of Tom. They had a splendid time. When everyone had left, Will sat down to open Zack's parcel. Inside was part 1 of an epic called The Villainous Dr. Horror. At the bottom it read, "P.S. Part 2 will be written on my return." In addition to the poem, there were 2 new paintbrushes, a second handbook on painters, and a lopsided sketch of Will. It showed him standing at an easel in a beret. The canvas was empty, but Will himself was covered in paint. "I shall put that on my wall," Will said, half to himself, half to Tom. At 8 o'clock they listened intently to the news on the wireless. Hundreds of German planes had been spotted. Will sat frowning, hoping Zack was all right. Tom puffed at his pipe.
"He's so skinny, a bomb would probably skip past him," he said, reading Will's thoughts.
The next day, for the first time in weeks, it rained. Will woke to the sound of it scuttling down the roof and bouncing off his open window. At 10 o'clock, the village was shocked by a news bulletin on the wireless. There had been continual bombing throughout the night in London. Moorgate lay in smoky ruins, Balham had been badly smashed, and bombs had fallen on one of the platforms at Victoria Station. A national day of prayer was announced. The following morning, Will awoke to the sounds of voices downstairs. He clattered down the ladder. He recognised them. It was Dr. and Mrs. Little. His heart gave a lift. He strode in excitedly, and they turned to look at him. Dr. Little looked grave, and Aunt Nance had been crying. He knew then that Zack was dead. In one black moment, he felt his legs buckling underneath him, and he collapsed into unconsciousness. In the weeks that followed the news of Zack's death, Will survived each day in a zombie-like daze. He felt that half of himself had been cut away, that life without Zack was only half a life, and even that half was empty. Outwardly he carried on as normal, helping Tom and catching up with schoolwork. Inwardly he felt too numb to even cry. He avoided the Littles' cottage as much as possible. The months passed. Christmas came and went. Will saw George and the twins occasionally, but he didn't talk very much. Tom waited patiently until the moment came when Will would finally accept and mourn his friend's death. The day came without warning. One chill January afternoon, Will was going to see Geoffrey Saunderton. Over the past few months, he'd visited Geoffrey several times for extra lessons in drawing and painting. Ever since he'd started teaching at the school, he discovered Will's talent for the subject. He also came to know that Will missed his friend Zack desperately. "This is your subject for this afternoon," Geoffrey told him, indicating a teapot beside which he'd placed a photograph of two young men with their arms around each other. They seemed to be laughing a great deal. In front of the teapot he laid his pipe. Will recognized one of the young men as Geoffrey. "Who's the other man?" he asked. "Best friend," he replied. "Killed in action. Very talented. Brilliant sculptor." "Oh," said Will quietly. "That's his pipe, actually," Geoffrey told him. "You use his pipe?" "Yes. I know he would have wanted me to have it." Geoffrey added, "It makes him still a little alive for me whenever I smoke it. Do you understand?" Will didn't, nor did he want to. He sat down immediately to work. Usually he could immerse himself totally, but every time he caught sight of the laughing young man in the photograph and the pipe, it disturbed him. His hand began to tremble. Suddenly he saw Zack on his colourful bicycle, singing and lifting his arms high into the air, yelling, "Look, no hands!" and then falling straight into a hedge, and he remembered his scratched face grinning up at him. "I'm sorry," Will began. "I don't seem to be able to—" His voice trailed into silence. He pushed himself onto his feet and grabbed his coat. "I ought to go. I've got to get back." Geoffrey nodded and showed him to the door. He squeezed Will's shoulder gently. Better to accept than pretend that he never existed. Will stumbled out into the darkness, his eyes blurred, his body hurting all over. Tripping and falling, he reached the river at last. He stood staring at its glassy surface. His chest was pounding, and he felt again Zack's presence next to him. "You're not here!" he cried. "You'll never be here!" He picked up a dead branch and struck it against a tree trunk until it shattered. He was angry that Zack had died, angry with him for going away and leaving him. Catching his breath for a moment, he stood up stiffly and looked up through the branches of the trees. "I hate you, God! I hate you! You hear me!" He stood yelling at the sky until he sank exhausted and sobbing onto the ground. He had no idea how long he had lain there asleep. It felt like a year. Tom was waiting for him at the gate. Will's face was covered in earth and tear stains, and his lips and eyelids were swollen and puffy. "I'm sorry, Dad," Will said. "I didn't think you'd be worried like. I had to be on my own, see? I forgot about you. I didn't think. Sorry."
"You're home now. You look fair whacked."
It wasn't until Will was asleep and Tom lying in his own bed that he finally realized what Will had said.
"He called me Dad," he whispered.
The tears ran silently down his face.
"Will!" cried Aunt Nance, opening the back door. She was speechless for a moment. "Come in. We've missed you," she said.
Will stepped into the kitchen. She lit half a cigarette lovingly, as if it was the last one left in Great Britain. "Aunt Nance, can I ride his bike?" Mrs. Little wasn't sure if she'd heard correctly. "Can I ride Zack's bike?" She stared at him for a moment.
"Yes, if you want to. I didn't know you could ride, Will."
"I can't, not yet, but I will." It took Will the whole day to master enough skills to control the bicycle and keep his balance for any length of time. Through sheer dogged determination, he finally managed to ride with confidence and pleasure. His new sense of freedom was exhilarating. When he came to a steep hill, he got off the bicycle and wheeled it to the top. It was wonderful to look down at the wide stretch of fields and woods and tiny icy streams. He breathed in deeply. "Zack ain't dead," he murmured. "Not really. Not the inside of Zack." "No one can take memories away," he said, and he watched the sun gradually sinking into the roots of the trees. When he finally rode back to the cottage, he found Tom sitting in the armchair with book and a cup of tea. Sammy was flopped down at his feet. "Dad," Will said, sitting on the arm of his chair.
"Yes? What is it?"
Tom asked. "It's good to be alive, Dad, ain't it?" And he gave Sammy a gentle stroke. Goodnight, Mr. Tom was written by Michelle Magorian and abridged by Maria Viga. The reader was David Briley. The producer, Peter Fossard. The music was by Roger Lynn of the BBC Radiophonic Workshop.